This is the Minimum Commitment Film Theory in Small Doses. For the next 5 episodes, we're going back to the early years of the Cold War, when American science fiction became a remarkable reflection of the culture that produced it. World War II had ended, but peace brought new anxieties. The atomic bomb had demonstrated the extraordinary possibilities of science while introducing the very real possibility of human extinction. The Cold War created an enemy that seemed both distant and potentially hidden among us. Political suspicion entered everyday life. Technology promised progress while giving humanity increasingly powerful ways to destroy itself. And science fiction absorbed all of it. Suddenly, movie screens were filled with flying saucers, alien visitors, strange creatures, secret invasions, and civilizations with technologies far beyond our own. But those creatures didn't simply come from outer space. They came from somewhere much closer to home. They emerged from the fears, suspicions, political tensions, and uncertainties of the people sitting in theaters. Across 5 films, we will watch that fear gradually change shape. Fear of the outsider becomes fear of misunderstanding. Fear of invasion becomes fear of ourselves. And eventually, science fiction asks whether humanity can survive the things it has created. Because science fiction did not predict the future, it revealed what people feared about the present. I'm Don Lawler, film scholar with a passion for sound. And we will begin with a question. How do we decide what we are afraid of? Let's get into it. In 1951, the monster still came from somewhere else. The Thing from Another World begins in Anchorage, Alaska, at a military base, where an unexplained object in the Arctic is immediately understood as a possible security problem. Before the film identifies the visitor as extraterrestrial, it gives us the language of the early Cold War: aircraft, borders, the North Pole, and the possibility of Soviet involvement. The alien hasn't appeared yet. The flying saucer hasn't been discovered. Nothing has attacked anyone. But the film has already established the conditions under which the unknown will be interpreted. This world is prepared to be suspicious. And for an American audience in 1951, that suspicion would have been familiar. World War II had ended only 6 years earlier. The Soviet Union had tested its first atomic bomb in 1949. The United States and its allies were fighting in Korea. Senator Joseph McCarthy was publicly claiming that communists had infiltrated the American government. The enemy of the Second World War had been relatively easy to locate on a map. The emerging Cold War enemy was different. It might be thousands of miles away. It might be flying over the Arctic. It might already be here. That makes the North Pole an interesting place to set this story. The Arctic isn't simply an empty landscape where filmmakers can hide a monster. During the early Cold War, the polar region represented a potential route between the Soviet Union and North America. The shortest path between enemies passed over a vast, frozen landscape where almost anything could remain unseen. And the Thing turns that geopolitical anxiety into geography. The characters are surrounded by white. There are few landmarks. Communication with the outside world is limited. Something has arrived. Nobody knows what it is. So they go looking. What they discover buried beneath the ice is enormous. A spacecraft. For a brief moment, the unknown becomes an extraordinary scientific discovery. Then they try to recover it. The men place thermite charges around the craft to melt the surrounding ice and destroy the spacecraft instead. It's almost funny in its efficiency. Humanity encounters technology, potentially centuries beyond its own, and, within minutes, blows it up. But there is something darker underneath that moment. The atomic age was built around a contradiction. Scientific knowledge had given humanity extraordinary power. It had not necessarily given humanity the wisdom to control that power. The men don't destroy the spacecraft intentionally. They are trying to understand it. But their attempt to master the unknown through technology destroys the very thing they hope to study. What remains is a body frozen in the ice, and they bring it home. That may be the most revealing moment in the entire film. The question changes from what crashed to what have we brought home? Because the Thing does not invade the station. We bring it inside. And once that happens, this isolated Arctic outpost begins to look like something much larger. There is the military, represented by Captain Hendry, played by Kenneth Tobey. There is science, represented by Dr. Carrington, played by Robert Cornthwaite. There is the press, represented by Scotty, played by Douglas Spencer. And each institution responds to the unknown according to its own priorities. Hendry wants security. Carrington wants knowledge, and Scotty wants the story. None of those desires is inherently unreasonable. That's what makes their conflict interesting. Carrington is fascinated by the creature because it represents a discovery unlike anything humanity has ever encountered. He wants to preserve it, study it, communicate with it, if possible. And Carrington knows something about the consequences of scientific discovery. He had been at Bikini Atoll, where the United States conducted atomic testing after World War II. That detail is significant. The film places a scientist associated with the atomic age directly beside another discovery that could potentially transform human understanding. But where Carrington approaches that discovery through the possibilities of scientific inquiry, Hendry has to consider the consequences of allowing that inquiry to continue unchecked. And their disagreement isn't simply a personality conflict. It reflects a culture simultaneously fascinated and frightened by scientific power. How much should we know? How quickly should we act? And what happens when knowledge produces consequences faster than the institutions surrounding it can respond? Hendry relies on procedure. He communicates with his superiors and waits for authorization before acting. Carrington finds that caution frustrating. Discovery doesn't necessarily wait for bureaucracy. and neither does the opportunity to understand something humanity has never encountered before. Scotty introduces another responsibility entirely. The public has no idea what has been discovered beneath the Arctic ice, and he believes they have a right to know. So, inside this isolated station, 3 institutions are confronting the same unknown from 3 different positions: scientific inquiry, military authority, and public information. And none of them can agree on what should happen next. They won't have much time to decide. The thing escapes, and uncertainty becomes fear. But notice what happens next. Almost immediately, the creature is shot. From that moment on, every encounter between the thing and the people inside the station happens within a relationship that has already turned hostile. We eventually learn that the creature is extraordinarily dangerous. What we never learn is what it intended before that first shot was fired. This is the point where the film starts referencing something much older than the Cold War. H.P. Lovecraft famously described fear of the unknown as humanity's oldest and strongest fear. The thing from another world understands that fear remarkably well, but it also suggests something else. Human beings don't tolerate the unknown for very long. We name it. We classify it. We decide what it means. An unidentified object becomes an aircraft. An aircraft becomes a possible Russian incursion. A strange body becomes a scientific specimen. And once that body escapes, uncertainty acquires another name entirely. Enemy. Naming something makes uncertainty feel manageable. But naming something isn't the same as understanding it. And that distinction becomes increasingly important as the film progresses. The creature is humanoid enough to resemble us, but biologically it is something radically different. It attacks. It kills. It reproduces in ways that suggest it could spread far beyond the station. Suddenly, the fear of invasion and the fear of infiltration become one and the same. The threat came from outside. Now it is inside. And if it escapes, it may reproduce. The creature becomes almost perfectly suited to early Cold War anxieties. It descends from the sky. It is brought inside a secure American outpost. Once loose, its presence transforms that isolated community into a place of suspicion and fear. And if allowed to spread, it could replace the world the characters know. But reducing the thing to a stand-in for communism would make the film less interesting than it actually is. The creature doesn't need to represent one specific political enemy. What matters is the way everyone responds to it. The thing arrives in a culture that has already learned to interpret uncertainty as potential danger. And eventually, the characters have good reason to fear it. The creature kills. It feeds on blood. Its reproductive capabilities suggest consequences far beyond the Arctic station. By then, Hendry's decision to destroy it becomes understandable. But there's a detail worth remembering. The thing didn't attack the station when it arrived. It crashed. We know what the creature does after that. By the end of the film, destroying the thing feels necessary. But that doesn't answer the question of whether conflict was inevitable. Perhaps that's the more unsettling idea the thing from another world leaves behind. We spend the entire film asking what the creature is. Maybe we should also be asking what our fear made us believe it was. 2 years later, another object would fall from the sky into another isolated American landscape. Once again, people would confront something they didn't understand and try to determine whether it posed a threat. Only this time, science fiction would push that unanswered question much further. What happens when fear chooses the enemy before understanding has a chance? That's your thought for the day. Minimum commitment, maximum meaning. See you next time. The Minimum Commitment is produced, recorded, and edited by Don Lawler. Music by Don Lawler.